Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
So today, inshallah, we're talking about Jinn.
Okay.
So I guess really just begin with the first question is, first of all, as a topic, is this a scary topic?
Essentially, at first, yeah. And it's not because of how religion talks about this topic that it becomes scary. It's just the culture. It's just the tales and fairy tales that have been passed on for generations. Yeah, people are scared and they're afraid of this. But religiously and Islamically, you shouldn't be.
So explain to me why culturally do people talk about it?
So just think about over the years, whenever people talk about demons, jinns, and Satan and shaitan and all of that, immediately what's depicted is like this really scary image of something that's got horns, it's got teeth, it's got vicious eyes. Now, to some degree, that might be true, but at the end of the day, at least for Muslims in the Quran, Allah tells us very straightforward that the shayateen, they are da'ifa, they are weak. They're intimidating, they can spook you, they can scare you, just like if you were walking in the dark and a spider crawled up your leg or something. You would scream, but at the end of the day, it's just a spider. As long as it's not dangerous, it's just a spider.
So how does the Quran speak about, I guess let's talk about it from an Islamic perspective. What are jinn?
So jinns are a creation of Allah. They are unseen. Allah tells us they can see us. We can't see them. And they have been around for thousands and thousands of years, even prior to the creation of mankind.
Do they live in societies just to say similar to ours, fathers, mothers, and stuff like that?
So the tradition goes, the Prophet ﷺ told us that they live just like us. So yeah, they do have villages, communities, they live in homes, they have families, they can procreate, they can get married. They are literally just like human beings, but they are a nation that we just can't see.
Can we assume that they are, that they're good or bad?
We can assume that at the end of the day, there's really nothing beneficial for us. But it may appear that there could be some good in them. But what's important is that with that being said, our Prophet ﷺ told us that even if they do have good, you are still not permitted to take from them because they're just so deceiving.
Yeah. How do they live for a long time?
Oh yeah.
I just kind of want you to describe to me the society they live in and the lifestyle and what they do.
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, there are stories of demons living for hundreds of years. So they definitely can have a long lifespan. They live, generally speaking, in barren lands that humans won't, walk through or drive through or interact with. And the wisdom behind that is Allah tells us that they are a creation that hate human beings so much that they try to distance themselves from us as much as possible.
They hate human beings? How?
Yeah.
Why is that?
So this goes back to the whole story of the prostration of when Allah had ordered the angels as well as the jinn to prostrate to Adam alayhi salam. So everybody did that except, as the story goes, Iblis himself. So his only reason was that, look, I'm better than them. You created me from fire, they created me from clay. So at the end of the day, there was an inferiority complex within Iblis that he felt that he was better than this creation, this human being. And because he didn't get his way, at the end, Allah had allowed him, and this conversation is even recorded and noted in the Quran, in Surah Al-Hijr and other surahs as well, that okay, fine, I'm going to leave you with that. You can go ahead and take out your frustration with human beings until the day of judgment. I'll give you that. But as long as my creation, meaning human beings, are sincere and loyal to me, they will always win. So that's what he was left with. It's not really a fair deal, but that's what Allah had left him with, in the sense that, okay, fine, I'll take that and I'll go, but I really hate them for they got preferred over me.
But now we're talking about the evil side of the jinn, right? But I mean, there's also a reference in the Quran to good jinn, ones who believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yeah.
And once they heard the Quran. So now, can we assume that there was a fight also between goodness and evil within the jinn societies themselves? Is it something like
Sure. To some degree, there might be. I mean, at the end of the day, they still call Allah Rabb. So they still submit to Him and they still acknowledge that He is the Master. But it didn't stop this creation from doing the things that they do to tempt mankind, to solicit their affairs, to solicit their intentions. It still didn't stop that. But at the end of the day, to sort of wrap this up and to really understand from a bird's eye view of what their purpose is, at the end of the day, they are out there to really push us to the limit. And as long as we have our loyalty to the Quran, to the Prophet ﷺ, as long as we still have that sense of faith, we will always win.
Okay, talk to me a little bit about the relationship between humankind and jinn kind. Like what happens? Well, I guess really we talk about possession or how do they come together?
So this is the idea, right? And I mean, for some of the listeners, this might sound a bit surprising at first. We really don't come together. We both are given equal opportunity to live. We are both creations that are accountable in front of Allah. But we have our distinct and clear, separate lifestyles and choices that we make. So on the one
within
hand,
the same world, though.
Within the same
so
world.
They could be around us.
They could be around us. They are. We don't even have to, hesitate and say, but we can confidently say they are a creation and they are around us. And once they are there, we always have to be cognizant of the idea that as long as they are there, I could always be tempted to do something that is disobedient to Allah, because essentially that is the ultimate goal of this creation, is to push mankind to disobey as much as possible. So as a result, they could leave the earth, leave this world in that particular way, and have to stand in front of Allah and account for that.
Okay, so it sounds scary.
It is.
You're basically describing really kind of are they intelligent? Are they very smart? Are they...
I wouldn't say...
We can say...
I mean, I wouldn't say generally they're not intelligent. They're very tricky. They've got a lot of tricks. They can make what should appear as something awful in front of our eyes to be something very beautiful and attractive. They can take the things that we're supposed to struggle against and make them into things that we would desire and want the most. So they're very tricky in that sense. But again, as long as a believer has got a sincere intention to do the right thing, they will always win. It's always brains over all of these tricks and everything else. Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about the idea of possession.
Okay. So possession is always an interesting conversation because unless you've either seen it or studied it, it's a tough thing to believe in. Hollywood has taken this idea of possession and sensationalized it and commercialized it to the point where it's just fun to look at now. That really doesn't happen. Unless you meet somebody who has experienced that, or you witness for yourself certain behavioral changes in someone, whether it be through their voice, through their actions, or what have you, and you witness it with your own eyes, all of these different things that are happening in front of you with respect to this individual, it's a tough thing to believe. So it's just one of those areas in life where you really have to see it to believe it, but it is as real as it gets.
How does it happen? Talk to me physically, like how...
So scholars of Islam talk about this all the time, and they categorize some of the main reasons why somebody could potentially get possessed. It all boils down to weak faith, lack of commitment. It also boils down to a bit of carelessness. So, for example, somebody might walk in, front of an ocean at a beach, right, and just stand in front of the ocean and do something absurd like pollute the ocean or throw something in there or take a rock and just wildly throw it, to be completely unaware of what might be living in the ocean and the creatures that are there and respecting all of that, not realizing that in addition to that, there could be a jinn just sitting on the water and actually lives there. How, we don't know, but we have stories like this. And as a result, you hurt them without even knowing, so they come and they possess you and say, hey, you hurt my family. Like, there are real documented stories like this. So they could possess also to avenge something that you've done to them. They could simply just horseplay. Because again, going back to that whole story of Adam alayhi salam, what happened there was the moment that changed everything. So you humans, I just don't like you, so I'm going to possess you. And it's important for people to actually understand what possession is.
They have religions similar to ours?
Yeah.
So I guess really then, because I did hear in like, call it exorcism exercises, right?
Yeah.
Is when somebody would ask them what the religion they are, and then they would teach them. They would basically tell them, well, this is not permissible in Islam for you to live in this person's body or to harm this person, and so on and so forth. So they actually accept preaching.
Some do. So there's a protocol that every exorcist would follow. And one of that procedure within that protocol is to at least advise, call them to the right thing and say, hey, look, you can't be doing this. You need to fear Allah. Sometimes it works. Unfortunately, a lot of time it doesn't. You have to probe even further. You have to try other things to really work at that jinn leaving the person. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so this is interesting. So let's maybe get into the how does exorcism itself work? I mean, this is just basically, because we've seen it happen in the Christian faith, Catholic specifically, right? We've seen this happen. And we actually heard of ruqya, happens before the Prophet ﷺ's time, right? So if it's, and now basically Muslims do it through ayat, Quran and dua and so on and so forth. So how do words, how can words affect them so much?
We really don't know. There is one weak narration that our Prophet ﷺ told us that when a jinn hears an ayah of the Quran, it affects them like balls of fire being thrown at them. How does that affect, unveil at the end of the day? We don't really know. Even the idea of what possession is, what actually takes place in someone's body, we still don't really know. I've heard some scholars relate that to some kind of energy that somebody feels. I don't know. Some people, and I've actually talked to people and worked with people who were possessed, I would ask them at that very moment, what do you feel right now? And they'd say to me things like, I feel a lot of pressure, I feel hot, or I can hear voices, I can hear him or her saying certain things to me. What that is, if it's just a figment of their imagination, is it something else? We really don't know. But there is a way actually of how to make that distinction between somebody who is just mentally sick as opposed to somebody who is possessed. It's a very clear method of how to make that distinction.
How do you do that?
So pretty much the person who experiences anything unusual mentally, the first thing they would do is they would go through all the natural procedures of getting treatment, seeing doctors and professionals and so on. Once you exhaust all of those procedures and a doctor or professional says to you, hey, look, we've tried everything and there is nothing else we can do for you anymore. As long as they say that and that's the conclusion, then that's when you turn to, okay, what if it's a spiritual problem? And when you turn to that direction now, there's only one cure. Generally speaking, anything Islamic, but even more so, the entire Quran. And literally what you would do is just start reciting Quran on yourself or have someone else do it for you and see if that, brings out a reaction.
What's the percentage like of, you speak about this like it's something that's known, but is it rampant? Is this happening all the time? What are we talking about here, numbers-wise?
I wouldn't say rampant. It's more common than the average Muslim would think. There's a good chance that both of us would have sat beside, talked to people who were possessed and we didn't know. Because one of the tricks of possession is it doesn't always happen in front of you. Sometimes somebody would come to you and say, hey, I'm possessed. You start a reading with them and you do it for an hour and nothing happens. It just means that the jinn is not present at that time. And then when they go home, everything is out of control all over again. So I wouldn't say it's rampant, really. It is common. And I think that at the end of the day, average Muslims at least have heard or understand about the concept of possession, but don't really know the implications of it. So I think the idea is known, but when it comes down to actual cases, not as rampant as we might think. Allah knows best.
Okay. So should one be scared? Should one be concerned?
The stronger your faith, the less fear you have with the shayateen and jinn. And that's really the bottom line. Your fear is an illustration of the level of faith and trust you have in your Creator. The more you trust Him, the more loyal you are to Him, the more obedient you are and submissive you are to Him, the less and less likely you are afraid. And you essentially find more and more clarity that, wait a minute, at the end of the day, I actually have the greatest tool to combat this creation, which is knowledge of the Quran and wisdom and how to use it. These are what I call the two most important tools to combat any jinn and any type of possession.
Okay. So this is now when the possession actually happens. Is there a way for us to protect ourselves from it happening?
Yes, absolutely. So the first thing is anything Islamic, whether that mean praying or Quran or du'as, any kind of Islamic discipline, generally speaking, protects you from that. And it doesn't have to be restricted to study. It could just be your overall discipline and choices you make and the lifestyle you choose to live, as long as it's halal and it's permissible, etc. All of those things fit under the protection. The second thing is that really your connection with Quran protects you not just from jinn possession, but everything evil in life, generally speaking. And I always tell people that if you were to skip all of the other methods of how to protect yourself and you just stick with Quran, that might be sufficient. But in addition to that, aside from the Quran, is to try to reflect your choices and your lifestyle as much or as closest to the Prophet ﷺ as possible. Mm-hmm. When you try to do things like he did, again, that attitude alone, in and of itself, is a protection.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I just want to wrap it up now then, I guess. Finally, really, what would you suggest for anyone who's researching this topic? What should they do? What should they read on?
So if you want to learn about just jinns in general, there are a ton of information. There are tafsirs. There's even a surah called Surah Jinn. So in terms of material, there is a lot. And many scholars in pretty much every language have talked and written on this subject. So that's one thing. If you want to learn specifically about possession, not just out of curiosity, but you want to get into that and cure it and so on and so forth, well, that's a process. So my sheikh that taught me how to perform exorcism made a strict criteria that I had to memorize Quran. I had to be able to recite it properly. So one thing to memorize, but I had to make sure my tajweed was on point. Then I had to be fluent in Arabic, and that I had to be grounded very well in hadith sciences. And then the last, which was the most important to him, for me to be able to really grasp how to, how to really exercise this discipline was, it's all about aqeedah. I had to strengthen my faith. And he'd give me a ton of books of aqeedah sciences and said, you have to be exceptionally fluent in these subjects. Once you can put all of that together, then maybe you can start to take this a step further and treat people. Otherwise, it's just information and knowledge at that point.
That's an interesting talk. Very scary and concerning. But Jazakallah khair for being here.
Rise up.